Hello, my name is Steve Kaufman, and I've written this book, yada yada yada, and so on and so forth. And because this is the fourth part of what was supposed to be a single video, I'm just going to jump right into it. And in this fourth and final part of the fifth video in this series, well, technically that is correct, but only because the fifth video had to be split into four parts, and so I count these last four videos as one video. I did not know that you could count at all. What about what comes after 10? You eat 10 meals a day. You know numbers are used to count things other than meals. Okay, now that we know what a math whiz you are, may I proceed? Thank you. As I was saying, in this fourth and final part of the fifth video in this series, which, as young Einstein over here has pointed out, is technically the eighth video in the series, I'm going to explain why our minds produce a concept of self and how our misidentification with our concept of self inadvertently automates a choice that is not supposed to be automated, so that we then end up responding to reality in a way that leaves our individual awarenesses effectively trapped in a mind-generated physical and mental experiential environment. And so, even though the title of this video is How an Individual Awareness Becomes Trapped Within Its Mind, because video titles can only be so long, a full and more accurate title would be How an Individual Awareness Becomes Effectively Trapped Within Its Mind-Generated Experiential Reality. Because what traps us within our minds is our effective entrapment within the physical and mental realities that our individual awarenesses are using our individual minds to produce. Put another way, the walls of the cage in which our individual awarenesses become effectively trapped are not composed of the mind itself, but are instead composed of the physical and mental appearances that our individual awarenesses use our individual minds to produce, once we have converted those appearances into delusions through false belief in their nature. And for human beings, the most problematic appearance that we use our minds to generate is our concept of self, which is not in and of itself a delusion and so is not in and of itself problematic. Instead, our concept of self only becomes a delusion and so only becomes problematic once we make the seemingly unavoidable mistake of believing that our concept of self is what we really are. It is necessary for human beings to have a concept of self because we need a conceptual avatar in order to occasionally and temporarily operate in the conceptual realities of past and future, which are also abstract concepts that the human mind is able to create. But what is not necessary is that our individual awareness becomes effectively trapped within our concept of self. Our concept of self is supposed to be something that our awareness operates within for a moment or two or three when we need to consider what happened in the past or what might happen in the future, in the same way that you need a digital avatar to wander about and interact within a video game environment. And that's because past and future are mind-generated conceptual environments, and so we need a conceptual avatar to wander about and interact within those environments so that we can learn from the past and plan for the future, which are both very useful things. But what has happened is that our individual human awarenesses have become effectively trapped within our conceptual avatars or mind-generated concepts of self, so that we almost never operate outside those concepts of self, so that everything we do and every choice we make is a response that is being dictated by our concept of self, which then denies us the opportunity to consciously choose how to exercise our free will, so that it no longer operates as a truly free will, but instead operates as a will or conscious intention that is effectively enslaved to whatever concept of self our individual awareness has, through misidentification, inadvertently trapped itself within. And as mentioned repeatedly in most of these videos, how we choose to exercise our free will or conscious intention determines the positive or negative nature of what we become aware of as our in-the-moment emotional reality. And for that reason, inadvertently allowing our delusional concepts of self to make that choice for us causes us to lose control of our emotional realities, because we are no longer in direct or conscious control of the choice that determines the quality of the emotional reality that we are in any given moment creating and becoming aware of. As mentioned previously in prior videos, what emotional reality is supposed to do is provide you with informational feedback that lets you know whether the in-the-moment direction or attitude of conscious intention that you are choosing as a localized flow of awareness aligns with or opposes the direction or attitude of conscious intention that is being chosen in that same moment by your non-localized awareness. And you naturally want your localized flow to align with its non-localized flow, not just because that is how these organic technologies were designed to operate, but also because it is simply the case that your non-localized awareness knows how to deal with every circumstance in the best possible way, because it has a universal perspective that takes everything into account, because it is the everything that is actually there where experiential reality only appears to be. And you can align yourself with its solution and feel better while going along with the way it is dealing with some circumstance in the best possible way, or you can oppose its solution and feel worse while going against the way it is dealing with that circumstance. It's your call because you, like it, have free will, because you, like it, are an individual flow of awareness. And together you and it exist and function as an indivisible awareness duality. But human beings tend to ignore and not act upon the informational feedback that emotional reality continuously provides them with because human beings, for the most part, have no idea of what emotional reality actually is or how it is created, because human beings, for the most part, have little to no awareness of the other non-localized pole of their indivisible awareness duality as a result of the mistaken beliefs they harbor regarding the nature of what are only mind-generated physical and mental appearances, because those mistaken beliefs cause those created appearances to function as reality obscuring and self-obscuring delusions. There's a lot of talk these days about living your best life, much of which comes from people who are trying to sell you something. And here's what I have to say about that. It is simply not possible to live your best life if you have no direct awareness whatsoever of the reality that you really are. End of story. Absent some direct awareness of the reality that you really are, there is only delusion and bondage. Because absent some direct awareness of the reality that you really are, you have no choice but to go through life misidentifying with and responding to reality according to whatever set of concepts you have, for whatever reason, decided to link or connect to your innate sense of I am. Put another way, spending your entire organic life with your individual flow of awareness caught up in an experiential delusion, mistakenly believing what are only mind-generated physical and mental appearances to be realities that are both actually there and what you really are, so that you then go through life responding to reality not according to what you really are, but only according to what you mistakenly conceive and believe yourself to be, so that you then go through life quite often responding to reality in a way that is the equivalent of poking yourself in the eye with a pointed stick, is not and can never be your best life, because there is definitely a much better and much less painful way to live. And I know that for a fact because I still live both ways. And I can tell you that operating with some awareness of what I really am leads to far better experiential outcomes than those that are created when I am operating while completely misidentified with and trapped within what is only an idea or concept of self. Now, here you might ask, if living or operating with some awareness of the reality that is both actually there and what you really are is so much better than living or operating with no awareness of that reality, then why don't you just maintain that awareness at all times? And the answer is because I have not yet developed a sufficient depth of awareness of that reality, and as a result, I am not always able to maintain that awareness when certain triggering events occur, such as my wife being in a bad mood and then giving me shit for no reason. Sometimes I am able to maintain awareness of the fundamental reality when such triggering events occur, and sometimes I am not, depending upon how deep my awareness of the fundamental reality is at the moment the triggering event occurs. And when I do maintain awareness of the fundamental reality when such triggering events occur, those events are relatively painless and take me deeper into that awareness, because I then consciously respond to those events in a way that does not cause me to suffer, because I just naturally don't respond with any significant degree of internal resistance, because I am aware of where that sort of response will take me emotionally, and I don't want to go there. And so I instead naturally respond with some degree of allowing and acceptance because I am also aware of where that sort of response will take me emotionally, and I do want to go there. On the other hand, when I do not maintain awareness of the fundamental reality when such triggering events occur, either because I was already unaware of it or was not that deeply aware of it, I then unconsciously respond to those events in a way that causes me to suffer, because I then automatically respond with some degree of internal resistance, which then places me in a state of self opposition. And in those cases, I automatically respond with some degree of internal resistance and self opposition because, while unaware of the reality that I really am, I am instead mistakenly aware of myself as what is only an idea or conception of self. And that misidentification then causes my free will choice to direct my individual awareness toward what I am aware of as reality in an attitude of either allowing or resistance to become automated by and so be made by that concept of self, in which case then it is not free at all. And such events are triggering precisely because they seem to be some sort of attack or assault upon what I, in that moment, mistakenly believe and conceive myself to be. And so I respond automatically and delusionally with some degree of internal resistance and opposition toward the triggering event and thereby produce a negative emotion. And because that negative emotion falsely appears to have been caused by the triggering event rather than by my internal response to the event, that additional delusion then causes me to internally oppose the triggering event with even greater force, which then produces an even stronger or more forceful negative emotion that is not actually being caused by the triggering event, but is actually being caused by my delusion based and increasingly self oppositional response to the triggering event. Again, I'm not here to tell you how to live. I'm just here to let you know what you really are and how the infinite and formless reality that you really are operates so that you can understand the cause and effect consequences of what you choose to believe about the physical and mental appearances that the individual awareness that you really are is using your individual mind to create. In essence, what I am doing is providing you with a sort of owner's manual so that you can understand how the organic technology that you are presently flowing through and animating operates to produce what you become aware of as experiential reality, in order to provide you with the opportunity to regain conscious control of your free will or conscious intention so that you can exercise it consistently in the way that you naturally want to exercise it instead of in a way that is being dictated by your concept of self, which sometimes dictates that you exercise your free will or conscious intention in the way that you naturally want to exercise it, and at other times dictates that you exercise it in the way that you naturally don't want to exercise it, but still do anyway, because your will is not really free, and so you really don't have a choice, while your individual awareness is misidentified with and so effectively trapped within a concept of self that is automating and so dictating that choice. And here it is important to point out that our concept of self is able to dictate how we exercise our will or conscious intention, not because it truly has power over our individual awareness, because it is just an unreal appearance after all. Instead, our concept of self is only able to dictate how we exercise our conscious intention as a result of our individual awareness inadvertently and unknowingly ceding that choice to that mental appearance through misidentification with it. And that's why conscious control of your free will, so that it is truly free rather than bound and enslaved to a concept of self, can only take place when there is some awareness of the reality that you really are, so that you can accurately identify with and consciously choose how you are going to exercise your free will according to and in alignment with that real reality, instead of misidentifying with and unconsciously exercising your free will according to the seeming needs of an ultimately unreal conceptual reality or mental appearance. If you are steering a car while blindfolded, you may be controlling which way the car is going, but that is not conscious control. To exercise conscious control, you need to take the blindfold off. However, in the situation we are in, no one can take the blindfold off for us. Instead, we have to take it off ourselves because it is our individual awareness that is, through mistaken belief, continuously putting it on. And so I'm just trying to get you to understand that, in all likelihood, you are presently driving your organic vehicle while completely blindfolded. Because as things stand right now, that's the human condition, i.e., individual awarenesses flowing through and animating human bodies and minds with no awareness whatsoever of the formless reality that is both actually there and what they really are, because those individual awarenesses have inadvertently blindfolded themselves by making the unavoidable mistake of believing that the physical and mental appearances their highly evolved minds are able to create are realities that are both actually there and what they really are. And it is vital to understand that the mind generated physical and mental appearances are not, by their nature, self obscuring. Instead, it's just that those mind generated appearances must function as self obscuring delusions for as long as they are mistakenly believed to be realities that are either actually there or what one really is. And if you can understand that, then you can understand the importance of changing both what you believe about physical reality as being what's actually there and what you believe about your conception of self as being what you really are, so that those created appearances can stop functioning as delusions that continuously obscure from your awareness the reality that is both actually there and what you really are. It is simply the case that responding to experiential reality and awareness of and according to what you really are does not produce suffering, whereas responding to experiential reality and awareness of and according to whatever set of concepts you delusionally believe yourself to be almost always ends up at some point producing suffering, because responding to experiential reality according to what you delusionally believe yourself to be will always cause you at some point to automatically, unconsciously, and inadvertently flow your localized conscious intention in opposition to your non localized conscious intention, and thereby produce the negative emotions that are the essence of what we refer to as psychological suffering. It's pretty simple stuff once you understand what's actually there and what's actually going on where experiential reality appears to be, because there's just not all that much going on beyond the 10,000 physical and mental surface appearances. There's just a single, formless, and fundamental reality forming a series of iterative and so progressive relations with itself, and, as a result, eventually evolving the ability to produce a set of appearances within itself that some individual and yet indivisible portions of itself become mistakenly aware of as being realities that are actually there, where only it actually is, thereby obscuring from those individual awarenesses their own reality. And once those individual awarenesses have used those mind generated appearances to obscure from their awareness their own reality, they have no choice but to misidentify with some relatively random subset of those appearances, so that they then not only mistakenly believe those appearances to be realities that are actually there, but they also, in addition, mistakenly believe those appearances to be what they really are, thereby adding a second layer of delusion on top of the primary delusion, and thereby obscuring even more fully from their individual awarenesses their true self and nature. And that's when we eat the apple and the shit hits the fan, because that's when our individual awarenesses begin to undertake the absurdity of responding to reality by inadvertently and unconsciously flowing our individual awarenesses in opposition to the other non localized pole of our indivisible awareness duality, which then causes us to suffer. You see, mistakenly believing that physical reality is the reality that's actually there may obscure from your localized awareness the reality that is actually there, but that alone won't cause you to direct your conscious intention in opposition to the conscious intention of your non localized awareness, because it feels bad to do so. On the other hand, once a second layer of delusion is added to the mix, and which second layer of delusion is added when an individual human awareness makes the unavoidable mistake of identifying with its mind generated concept of self, at that point the individual awareness can be compelled by its concept of self to direct its conscious intention in opposition to the conscious intention of its non localized awareness, even though it still feels bad to do so, because the individual awareness is no longer conscious that it has a choice, because that choice has become inadvertently automated by its concept of self, and so takes place at what is now a subconscious or unconscious level, just like all the other automatic and automated body processes of which it is not aware. In the Garden of Eden mythology, eating the apple of the knowledge of good and evil is likely a metaphor that represents the identification of the individual awareness with their mind generated concept of self, because once one misidentifies with their concept of self and so operates continuously from within that conceptual reality, all other realities are then known and automatically responded to with respect to whether they seem to enhance or diminish that concept of self. Specifically, realities that seem to enhance one's concept of self are mentally labeled as good and are automatically and unconsciously responded to with an internal attitude of allowing and acceptance. On the other hand, realities that seem to diminish one's concept of self are mentally labeled as bad or evil and are automatically and unconsciously responded to with an internal attitude of opposition and resistance. That's the knowledge of good and evil, an additional mental appearance or concept that is applied to physical realities based on how those realities appear to affect one's concept of self when viewed from within and so through that concept of self. And those additional mental labels or concepts of good and evil, once they have been applied to any physical reality, then dictate how an individual awareness exercises its free will or conscious intention in response to that reality, so that its free will is no longer really free. How can you not internally allow that which seems to enhance what you mistakenly believe yourself to be? And how can you not internally resist that which seems to diminish what you mistakenly believe yourself to be? The answer is you can't, any more than you can't not blink your eye when something suddenly and unexpectedly appears to be coming at it, because it's an automated response that you no longer consciously control. If someone is coming at you with a weapon to try to harm you, you're not going to allow them to harm you. Instead, you are going to externally resist them in some way, and rightly so. But here we're not talking about an external response to reality in order to protect the physical body. Here we are talking about how we primarily and internally respond to reality with an attitude of allowing resistance in order to protect our conceptual body or conceptual avatar once we have made the unavoidable mistake of misidentifying with it. And so, to be clear, the response that becomes inadvertently automated and so taken out of our conscious control as a result of our misidentification with our concept of self is our internal and primary response to any reality. And that internal and primary response is the directing of our individual awareness, free will, or conscious intention toward whatever reality we are aware of with an attitude of either allowing or resistance. And that internal and primary response places our localized awareness in a relation of either alignment with or opposition to our non-localized awareness, because as localized awarenesses that are flowing through and animating fourth level structures, we are just one pole of what is actually an indivisible awareness duality. And each of those opposite relations of awareness to itself produces a specific and opposite type of emotional reality that we become aware of from our localized perspective, with relations of self-alignment producing positive emotions and relations of self-opposition producing negative emotions. And that's why what you are aware of as your in-the-moment emotional reality is actually primary and fundamental experiential information that is letting you know how you are directing your free will or conscious intention in that moment, regardless of whether you are doing it consciously or unconsciously. And if you are directing your individual awareness, free will, or conscious intention consciously and so freely, then emotional reality provides you with informational feedback that makes it possible for you to consciously adjust how you are exercising your free will or directing your conscious intention. On the other hand, if you are directing your individual awareness, free will, or conscious intention automatically and unconsciously, and so on freely, as dictated by your conceptual avatar, then emotional reality does not appear as the informational feedback that it actually is, but instead delusionally appears to be caused by the reality that you are internally, automatically, and unconsciously directing your awareness toward with an attitude of either allowing or resistance. And that emotional delusion creates these secondary unconscious responses of attachment and aversion, with attachment being an unconscious response of clinging to those realities that seem to produce a good feeling, and aversion being an unconscious response of pushing against those realities that seem to produce a bad feeling. Attachment is why some people who have more money than God remain obsessed with getting more, regardless of how many millions of other human beings have to suffer in order for them to do so. It's completely insane, but we all do the same thing to one degree or another with regard to various realities, meaning we all become attached and averse to various realities while misidentified with our mind-generated concept of self. Because we can't help it, because while misidentified with our concept of self, we are no longer freely exercising our free will because our primary response to reality is instead being dictated by our concept of self. And that then creates the false appearance and so delusion that what we are experiencing as our in the moment emotional reality has as its source whatever reality we are unconsciously reacting toward with an internal attitude of either allowing or resistance. And because the unconscious exercise of our free will and so the unconscious creation of our emotional reality creates the delusion that what we experience emotionally exists as a function of external reality, we then naturally try to control our emotional reality by controlling external reality, never realizing that there is a much more direct and reliable way to control and determine what we experience as our emotional reality. You see, we are still primarily trying to control our emotional reality because no one really wants to feel bad and everyone wants to feel good. That's just our nature. It's just that, owing to our misidentification with our conceptual avatars, we have inadvertently automated and so lost sight of what it is that we are ourselves doing to create our emotional realities, so that we are then left to try to control those realities secondarily by trying to arrange external reality in a way that our conceptual avatars will let us automatically allow rather than cause us to automatically resist. And when we, through unconscious reactivity, internally resist that which appears diminishing to the ego, we exercise our localized conscious intention in opposition to the conscious intention of our non localized self, which is internally and consciously accepting of everything because it is aware that everything is ultimately itself. And by exercising our localized conscious intention in opposition to the conscious intention of our non localized self, we go against the will of what we refer to as God, in which case we then produce a negative emotion and so cause ourselves to suffer, which then makes it seem as if we have been thrown out of paradise. But we don't really get thrown out of paradise because we can't get thrown out of paradise because paradise is what we really are, and we can't ever be other than what we really are, although we can become persistently unaware of what we really are. And reactively and unconsciously responding to reality according to how it appears while operating from within our concept of self keeps our individual awareness effectively trapped within that concept of self, where we remain persistently unaware of our true self and nature, thereby creating the delusion that we have somehow been thrown out of our own fundamental, all pervasive, and paradise like or nirvanic reality. There is nowhere that is that we are not, because we are what is. And as what is, we create appearances within our isness that are not what is, but which do appear to be what is. And then the uncreated isness that we really are mistakes the appearances that we have created within ourselves for being what is, which then causes what actually is to become obscured from our awareness, leaving us aware of only the created appearances and not at all aware of ourself. It's an absolutely amazing act of self-deception that rests entirely upon the self-obscuring that must take place when the unreal is mistaken for the real, i.e., when mind-generated appearances are mistakenly believed to be realities that are actually there, where only our own formless, fundamental, and all-pervasive awareness actually is. And so to summarize, once a localized awareness identifies with their mind-generated concept of self, that concept of self or ego then functions as a response template that is used to automatically determine how that individual awareness directs its free will or conscious intention toward what it is aware of as reality. Specifically, if what an ego-identified individual awareness is aware of as reality appears to enhance its ego, that reality is automatically responded to with an internal attitude of allowing. And if what an ego-identified individual awareness is aware of as reality appears to diminish its ego, that reality is automatically responded to with an internal attitude of resistance. And as I explained in video 4 of this series, responding to reality according to how it appears from within any conceptual reality puts into motion a vicious cycle that keeps one's individual awareness effectively trapped within that conceptual reality. And that vicious cycle is why responding to reality according to how it appears while operating from within our concept of self keeps our individual awareness effectively trapped within our concept of self. And the reason that human awarenesses get trapped in past and future and spend so little time aware of the present moment or now is because their individual awarenesses are effectively trapped in a conceptual avatar that only exists in the conceptual realities of past and future. As I stated in the previous video, we use our minds to generate a concept of self because we need a conceptual avatar to operate in the conceptual arenas of past and future. Basically, our conceptual avatar functions as our conceptual body in the conceptual arenas of past and future. And we use our minds to generate the conceptual arenas of past and future so we can learn from the past and plan for the future with respect to sustaining our physical bodies. Because while operating from within our conceptual avatars, we can experiment with various responses to try to come up with an optimal response regarding whatever past event we are recalling or whatever future event we are imagining. At least that was the original function and intended purpose of the ego or conceptual avatar that is able to be created by our Series 4 human minds, and that is still its function and purpose. However, once we misidentify with that conceptual avatar, our individual awareness then operates within it continuously, so that it is then inadvertently used and misused to consider all events and circumstances, not primarily with regard to how they might benefit or harm the physical body, but primarily with regard to how they might benefit or harm our conceptual avatar, because that's what we mistakenly believe we are. And that's why many people feel compelled to undertake actions that are so self-destructive and harmful to their bodies, because the seeming needs of the conceptual avatar have become the primary consideration in responding to reality rather than the actual needs of the body. And while effectively trapped within our conceptual avatars, which we refer to as I or me, events or circumstances that seem to enhance our conceptual avatars are automatically and unconsciously responded to with an internal attitude of allowing, thereby generating a positive emotion, whereas events or circumstances that seem to diminish that conceptual I or me are automatically and unconsciously responded to with an internal attitude of resistance, thereby generating a negative emotion. And so, once we misidentify with our mind-generated concept of self or conceptual avatar, a choice that was never supposed to be automated becomes inadvertently automated, so that a conceptual appearance that was originally designed to serve a useful function is now being overused and misused, and as a result, is creating significant and increasing dysfunction. Because while misidentified with our conceptual avatar, our individual awareness has no choice but to automatically and unconsciously direct its conscious intention with an attitude of resistance toward any reality that seems to threaten or diminish that conceptual avatar. And what that means is that while misidentified with our conceptual avatar, our individual awareness has no choice but to automatically and unconsciously direct its conscious intention in opposition to its non-localized self anytime its conceptual avatar or ego seems to be in any way threatened or diminished, because an internal attitude of resistance toward any reality is always a conscious intention that exists in opposition to the conscious intention of our non-localized self. Because again, our non-localized self is fully accepting of everything, because it is aware that beyond every appearance, there is nothing actually there other than the uncreated isness that is itself. And so human beings inadvertently and unconsciously cause themselves to suffer, not because they want to suffer or generate negative emotions, but only because they are compelled to do so while effectively trapped within their mind-generated concepts of self. And human beings don't know why they're suffering or what they can do to rid themselves of their suffering, because through the simple act of mistaken belief, they continuously obscure from their individual awarenesses the reality they need to be aware of in order to understand what they are themselves unconsciously doing to create that suffering. Now, I understand that people don't generally like to hear that they are, in some way, responsible for their psychological suffering. However, it is not my job to tell people who are operating from within a delusion of self what they want to hear. Instead, it is my job to tell people who are operating from within a delusion of self what they need to hear so they can free themselves from that delusion. Put another way, what I'm trying to do is wake people up so they can exit the nightmare that organic life often ends up being while one's individual awareness is effectively and completely trapped within what is just a mind generated concept of self, where they are left with no awareness whatsoever of the uncreated, timeless, and deathless reality they really are. And right now, I'm trying to wake you up to the power that you innately possess by virtue of what you really are, but which power you have, in all likelihood, inadvertently ceded to a reality that is just an appearance, because you don't know what you really are, because you instead know yourself as what is just a mind generated concept of self that is no more real than a reflection, projection, or rainbow. And the power that I'm talking about here is the power to consciously choose the internal attitude of allowing a resistance with which you direct your free will or conscious intention toward what you are aware of as reality, so that you can consciously control what you create as your emotional reality instead of just being tortured by negative emotions and enslaved by positive emotions. But beyond that, consciously choosing and so consciously controlling the emotional reality you create is about more than just feeling good and not feeling bad, because the same internal movement of awareness that determines your emotional reality also determines the conceptual options you are left to choose from as you externally respond to external reality. And it is simply the case that when you are directing your individual awareness in a way that is generating a negative emotion, the best and most functional conceptual responses to the situation aren't available to you. On the other hand, when you are directing your individual awareness in a way that is generating a positive emotion, the best and most functional conceptual responses to the situation are available to you. And the reason that is the case is because your non localized awareness knows what the best and most functional responses to any situation are, and it is focused in the direction of the conceptual realities that will generate those responses. And so when you align with your non localized awareness, which you are when you are generating a positive emotion, you become aware of the same conceptual realities that it is focused upon, thereby making those response filters or response templates available to you. On the other hand, when you are not aligned with your non localized awareness as a result of directing your conscious intention in opposition to its conscious intention and thereby generating a negative emotion, you become aware of an entirely different set of conceptual realities than the ones that your non localized awareness is focused upon, thereby making those suboptimal and often dysfunctional response filters available to you while simultaneously making the optimal and functional response filters unavailable. And that's why I said in the previous video that choosing whether to yell, slam down your fist, or stomp away may seem like choices, and they are to some degree, but if those are the only choices you seem to have in a particular situation, that's only because the other, more functional choices are presently out of your view and so unavailable to you, owing to the internal attitude of resistance that is being unconsciously chosen for you by your concept of self as a result of that concept of self seeming to be in some way threatened or diminished by what you, the individual awareness that is misidentifying with that concept of self, are aware of as reality. That's why emotional feedback is so important, because it's not just about feeling good or feeling bad, but is really about letting you know whether you, as a localized flow of awareness, are choosing to act in the world in alignment with or opposition to the response recommendations of your much more knowledgeable and much more aware non localized individuality. Put another way, beyond the surface appearance that we refer to as the physical universe, there is a non localized awareness that is trying to help your localized awareness get to where it is that you really want to go. But that non localized pole of awareness can't help your localized pole of awareness when you pay no attention to your emotional guidance system as a result of having inadvertently ceded your power to act upon that guidance to a mind generated concept of self that doesn't choose how to respond to reality based upon what feels good or bad, but instead responds to reality only according to whether the reality in question appears to enhance or diminish its conceptual self. Again, we do not actually live in a physical universe. Physical reality is just a mind generated appearance. Nor do we live in a mental universe, as all mental realities are also just mind generated appearances. Ultimately, we don't actually live anywhere because we are not our bodies. Instead, we are a formless or spiritual reality that is flowing through and animating bodies that are actually just relationally structured forms of that same formless reality. And that reality is everywhere and is ultimately everything because that formless, timeless, and deathless reality is the reality that is actually there where any mind generated reality only appears to be. And while that fundamental and formless reality is indivisible from itself and so exists in a state of unalterable oneness, it is also equally the case that that fundamental and formless reality exists and functions as an infinity of individualities, which is to say, as an infinity of individual awareness dualities. Oneness and individuality, and the reality that is actually there where physical and mental reality only appear to be, is not more one than the other, but is equally both simultaneously. And that is why the fractal pattern of simultaneous oneness and individuality appears everywhere, and trees are perhaps the easiest to recognize example of that pattern. That is, a tree is a single reality that is made up of an endless number of individual branches and leaves. It is not more one than the other, but is both simultaneously. Or consider the universe itself. The universe is a single reality within which arise an endless number of individual galaxies that are composed of an endless number of individual stars, some of which give rise to and sustain an endless number of individual life forms. And that pattern of simultaneous oneness and individuality arises persistently and pervasively in the universe because the reality of consciousness or awareness that is actually there, where the physical universe appears to be, is a single, formless, indivisible, and yet simultaneously individualized reality. And as a result, the relational structures that that reality produces through iterative and progressive relation to itself, all put on display in their own way, through their own particular and individual forms, the simultaneously singular and yet individualized nature of the reality out of which they are all constructed and of which they are all composed. Yes, we are all one, but we are also all individuals. And the oneness is not more real than the individuality, and the individuality is not more real than the oneness, because the reality that is actually there is both simultaneously. The trick is to operate as an individual, which is to say, as one pole of an indivisible awareness duality, while simultaneously aware of the underlying and all pervasive oneness of the reality that is both actually there and what you really are. That is how you love your neighbor as yourself, not as the result of being commanded to do so, but naturally and effortlessly through the direct awareness and so recognition of the fact that, although you may be different individuals, you are also simultaneously, beyond the physical and mental surface appearances, the same indivisible reality. But you can't recognize that fact and so can't naturally operate that way while effectively trapped within a mind generated concept of self that, owing to your misidentification with it, continuously obscures from your awareness your own reality and nature, while also causing you to, quite often, exercise your conscious intention in a way that places your localized individuality in opposition to your non localized individuality, thereby causing you to produce and become aware of a negative emotion that seems to be caused by your neighbor, but is actually being caused by the internal attitude of resistance that you are reactively and so unconsciously directing towards your neighbor, because that internal attitude of resistance has been automatically chosen for you by your mind generated concept of self, because your neighbor, in some way, is either actively diminishing or seems to have the potential to diminish that concept of self. Basically, while misidentified with your concept of self effectively forces you to respond to what you are aware of as reality in a way that has as its primary purpose the perpetuation of its own existence, regardless of how that makes you, the individual awareness, feel emotionally, because your concept of self does not give a fuck how you feel, because it's just a created appearance that is functioning as a response filter that you have inadvertently and unknowingly given the keys to the kingdom by making it the thing that determines your primary free will or conscious intention, allowing or resistance response to what you are aware of as reality. And so the problem is not our concept of self. Instead, the problem is that our individual awarenesses have become through misidentification, inadvertently and effectively trapped within our concept of self. And that misidentification with and effective entrapment within our concept of self inadvertently automates our primary free will or conscious intention response to reality, even though that is a choice and response that we are supposed to be making consciously, because making that choice consciously is the only way to consistently align our localized will or conscious intention with the will or conscious intention of the non localized, universal, and more self aware aspect of our indivisible awareness duality. The non localized, universal, and more self aware aspect of our indivisible awareness duality has a broad perspective, and we have a very focused perspective. And each of those perspectives has its purpose. And the individual awarenesses that are operating from those two different perspectives are supposed to be working together toward a common or shared goal. And our non localized individuality is working toward that shared goal because it has not handed over control of its free will or conscious intention to what is only an appearance. We, on the other hand, i.e., the localized individuality that is flowing through and animating these structured forms of our own formless reality, are quite often not working toward that shared goal because we have inadvertently handed over control of our free will or conscious intention to what is only an appearance. And as a result, we do not consciously choose the attitude with which we direct our free will or conscious intention toward what we are aware of as reality, according to what we are aware of as our emotional reality. Instead, that attitude is being automatically and unconsciously chosen for us by our concept of self. And as a result of that inadvertent automation, we are not able to make use of the informational feedback and so guidance that our emotional reality is continuously providing to us because we are not aware of the direct connection between our internal free will or conscious intention attitude toward reality as either allowing or resistant and the positive or negative quality, respectively, of what we become aware of as our in the moment emotional reality. Our localized free will or conscious intention is the directed movement of our awareness, and that directed movement is the conscious energy that is used to operate our bodily vehicles. And we can direct that energy in an attitude of either acceptance or resistance toward what we are aware of as reality. And we are supposed to make that fundamental choice and direct that energy consciously so we can direct it in the way that feels emotionally better in the moment. That's all. And we have a choice with regard to the attitude of acceptance or resistance with which we direct our conscious energy or conscious intention toward what we are aware of as reality, because we are the fundamental reality. And as the fundamental reality, we are perpetually in motion and are also, as a result of that perpetual motion, perpetually in relation to ourself. And that perpetual relation to ourself creates a choice because all relations always have two possible orientations, only one of which can exist or be in any one moment or now. As an analogy, imagine that you are placed in a very small room with another individual and you each have to keep walking. And in that situation, you can each walk in the same direction or you can walk in opposite directions. And if you walk in the same direction, then you are in a relation of alignment and you can each keep walking without running into each other. On the other hand, if you walk in opposite directions, then you are in a relation of non alignment, in which case then you will keep running into each other, as you are each then moving in opposition to the other's direction of motion. And now let's refine that analogy a bit so that it comes even closer to accurately representing the situation in which we find ourselves as we flow through and animate these organic technologies. In this refined analogy, we are still placed in a very small room with another individual, and we still both have to keep walking. However, in this refined analogy, the other individual is 1,000 times larger than we are. What that means is that the direction we choose to move does not really affect the other individual. However, the direction we choose to move affects us greatly, because if we choose to go in the same direction as the other individual, we are able to keep walking freely, whereas if we choose to go in the opposite direction, we keep getting run over by the other individual. That is the situation we are in as individual awarenesses that are flowing through and animating fourth level relational structures. That is, our individual pole of awareness is in motion and cannot help but be in motion. And the other individual pole of our indivisible awareness duality is also in motion and so also cannot help but be in motion. And that other individual pole is much larger than our individual pole, and it is moving in the direction it is moving, and we can either align our movement with its movement or we can move in opposition to its movement. That's all. And if our movement aligns with its movement, that particular relation of motion generates what we become aware of as a positive emotional reality. On the other hand, if our movement opposes its movement, that particular relation of motion generates what we become aware of as a negative emotional reality. That's all. And so, when you say, I feel this or that emotion, what you are really saying is, I am aware of the positive or negative product of the relation of motion that I am involved in this moment with the other pole of my indivisible awareness duality. Because that is what emotions really are, i.e., the product of a relation of motion. And that is why the word emotion is spelled the way it is, as words often contain within their structure the underlying reality or situation that they are being used to point toward or indicate. In any case, to return to the topic at hand, we don't get to choose whether or not our individual awareness is in motion. Our individual awareness is in motion. End of story. And we don't get to choose the direction of motion in which the non-localized pole of our indivisible awareness duality is moving. Also, end of story. But what we do get to choose, and what we have no choice but to choose in every moment, in every now, is our own individual direction of motion. And we also have no choice but to become aware of the emotional reality that our chosen direction of motion is generating as a function of the either self-aligned or self-oppositional relation of motion in which we must become involved with our non-localized individuality as a result of whatever direction of motion we are in that moment choosing. And we choose our internal free will or conscious intention direction of motion relative to our non-localized individuality by either internally accepting or internally resisting what we are aware of as reality. That is, internally accepting or allowing what we are aware of as reality is one movement of awareness, and internally resisting or opposing what we are aware of as reality is the opposite movement of awareness. Those are our primary and fundamental choices. But what we have inadvertently done through misidentification with our conceptual avatars is conceptually automate that primary and fundamental choice so that we, the localized and animating awarenesses, are no longer in conscious or direct control of that choice, so that we are then no longer in conscious or direct control of what we create and experience as our in the moment emotional realities, because we are instead allowing that primary and fundamental choice to be made by our conceptual avatars or mind-generated concepts of self. And our conceptual avatar does not make that fundamental choice of internal allowing or resistance based upon in the moment emotional feedback, but instead makes that choice based upon whether what we are aware of as reality has been judged or mentally interpreted to enhance or diminish itself, with those realities that are judged to enhance our conceptual avatar or ego being automatically allowed, and those realities that are judged to diminish it being automatically resisted. That's all. But here's the thing, allowing that primary choice to be automatically made by your conceptual avatar does not free your localized awareness from its obligation to become aware of the emotional reality that is produced as a result of that now automated choice. Put another way, you still have to feel the emotional reality that that primary choice creates, whether you are making that choice consciously or unconsciously. And so, you may not be conscious or aware that your conscious energy is being directed in one of two ways toward what you are aware of as reality, because that primary choice has become inadvertently automated, but it is still your localized conscious energy that is being directed in an attitude of either allowing or resistance, and so it is still you, the localized awareness, that must become aware of the emotional reality that is created as a result of that now automated choice. The only thing that automating that primary and fundamental choice does is put you in the position of being unable to modify that choice based upon the emotional feedback that is being created by whatever choice is being made. And that is not a situation that any awareness really wants to be in. We naturally want control of our emotional reality because we naturally want to feel good and not feel bad. But we don't have that control and cannot possibly have that control as long as the primary choice of directing our localized awareness toward what we are aware of as reality in an attitude of either allowing or resistance is being inadvertently automated as a result of our misidentification with our mind generated conceptual avatar. That's why, when that primary choice is being made for us by our conceptual avatar, we can't stop feeling bad no matter how much we want to not feel that way, because we have inadvertently handed over control of the choice that determines our emotional reality to our conceptual avatar, leaving us unable to make that choice ourselves. And our conceptual avatar is not supposed to be making that primary choice for us and thereby automatically and unconsciously determining what we become aware of as our emotional reality. Instead, we are supposed to be making that primary choice consciously and thereby determining for ourselves what we become aware of as our emotional reality. And when we are making that primary choice consciously and so are determining for ourselves what we become aware of as our emotional reality, what we become aware of as our emotional reality can then function in the way that it is supposed to function, which is as informational feedback that we can use to modify and fine tune the internal attitude with which we are directing our localized awareness toward what we are aware of as reality. On the other hand, when that primary choice is being made for us by our conceptual avatar, we have no way to functionally act upon or use the emotional information that is being produced as a result of the internal attitude toward reality that our conceptual avatar is automatically choosing. And our inability to functionally act upon or use that created emotional information causes negative emotional information to function instead as an instrument of torture, and causes positive emotional information to function instead as an instrument of enslavement. And if you think that I'm being overly dramatic, consider that in the year 2025, a relative handful of billionaires are in the process of making the lives of hundreds of millions of people much more difficult just so that they, the billionaires, can obtain more money than they already have, because they are enslaved by the feeling they get when they get more and are tortured by the feeling they get when they lose some. But the fact is, they are not really in control of what they are doing. Instead, what they are doing is being dictated to them by concepts of self that are so dense and dysfunctional that they have been rendered unable to feel empathy, leaving them with no limit to the lengths they will go to and the suffering they will inflict upon others in order to get more of what it is that they mistakenly believe causes them to feel good. But that's just an extreme example of how anyone who is identified with their concept of self is going to respond to reality and so behave, because the way in which anyone who is identified with their concept of self is going to respond to reality and so behave is in whatever way is being dictated to them by their concept of self. And the fact is, at the present time, most human beings are completely identified with their mind generated concept of self. And as a result, their responses to reality and so their behavior occurs not primarily as a result of the conscious exercise of their free will or conscious intention, but primarily as a result that is being automated, controlled, and dictated to them by their concept of self. And so, once again, the problem is that the primary free will or conscious intention choice by which we direct our flow of awareness in an attitude of either allowing or resistance toward reality is not supposed to be automated and unconscious, but has only become inadvertently automated and unconscious as a result of our misidentifying with our conceptual avatars or mind generated concepts of self. And that misidentification inadvertently automates that choice, because that misidentification leaves our individual awarenesses effectively trapped within our concepts of self, so that those concepts then function as ever present and universal response filters instead of as the only occasionally used past and future response filters that they were originally created to function as. Ultimately, the inadvertent automation of our primary free will or conscious intention choice to direct our flow of awareness in an attitude of either allowing or resistance toward reality does not serve any functional purpose. Because in order to serve a functional purpose, that choice needs to be made consciously by the localized awareness whose conscious energy is being directed toward reality in an attitude of either allowing or resistance. In a way, as indivisible portions of awareness that have become individualized and localized as a result of flowing through and animating these fourth level structures, We are like a hypothetical finger that has the ability to either go along with what the body as a whole wants it to do or do the opposite of what the body as a whole wants it to do. That's free will, the ability to direct one's localized conscious intention in alignment with or opposition to one's non localized conscious intention. And we have free will because no point of the reality that's actually there controls any other point of that same reality, no matter how much bigger that point is, because it's the same reality. What that means is that every point of the fundamental reality has the freedom to choose its attitude toward itself, because there really is no other choice, because there really is no other reality other than itself, because all other realities are just appearances that the real reality creates within itself through relation to itself. And with regard to the attitude of the fundamental reality toward itself, there are only two choices: self acceptance or self resistance. And self acceptance is the attitude and movement of our localized awareness that aligns with the conscious intention of our non localized self. And that self alignment puts us in the position of swimming with the current of our larger reality and thereby creates what we become aware of as a positive emotional reality. On the other hand, self resistance is an attitude and movement that does not align with the conscious intention of our non localized self, and that self opposition puts us in the position of swimming against the current of our larger reality and self, and thereby creates what we become aware of as a negative emotional reality. And so the attitude with which we direct our free will or conscious intention toward our own reality is, without question, the primary and most important choice we can make. And that choice is not only a choice that we get to make, it is a choice that we have no choice but to make in every moment, because there is no moment in which we are not in a relation of either self aligned or self oppositional motion with respect to our non localized self. We are moving, it is moving, and so there is always a relation of motion between us and it. And we get to decide what that relation is, and so we get to decide whether we create and experience a positive or negative emotional reality, but only if we have not, through misidentification, inadvertently automated that decision by allowing it to be decided instead by our conceptual avatar. We are the localized individuality, and it is the non localized individuality. And it is our job, so to speak, to align our conscious intention with its conscious intention. But we are not the slaves of our non localized individuality because we are free to go against it. But we are not free to feel good while we do so. That's just how it is. And believe you me, you would not want it any other way, because without emotional guidance, there would be complete chaos, as each point of reality would then be doing its own thing, regardless of what the rest of reality was doing, which is pretty much what human beings are doing now. And we are doing that because we have, through misidentification with our conceptual avatars, inadvertently automated the primary and most important choice that we can make, so that we are no longer making that choice consciously according to the emotional reality it produces, because we are instead allowing that choice to be made for us by our conceptual avatars, regardless of the emotional reality it produces. We still have to experience the emotional reality that that primary choice produces, but because that primary choice is being made automatically by our conceptual avatar according to its seeming needs and what it labels as good and bad, we lose the ability to consciously modify that choice on the basis of the emotional feedback that that choice produces, leaving us the emotional slaves of circumstance, feeling good when we become aware of stuff that has been mentally labeled good, because that stuff seems to enhance our conceptual avatar, which then causes such stuff to automatically be met with an internal attitude of acceptance, and feeling bad when we become aware of stuff that has been mentally labeled bad, because that stuff seems to diminish our conceptual avatar, which then causes such stuff to automatically be met with an internal attitude of resistance. And that is one way to go through life. And that is the way that most people presently go through their lives, which is by trying to indirectly control their emotional reality, by trying to directly control their external reality so that they are only presented with good stuff and not bad stuff. Because when you are inadvertently and unconsciously using your conceptual avatar to determine your internal attitude toward reality, you are always going to end up internally allowing realities that have been mentally labeled good and internally resisting realities that have been mentally labeled bad. with the end result being the creation and awareness of a positive emotion when good stuff is encountered, and the creation and awareness of a negative emotion when bad stuff is encountered. However, I would submit for your consideration that there is a far better way to go through life other than trying to indirectly control your emotional reality by trying to directly control external events and circumstances over which you have very little to no control. And that far better way is to directly control your emotional reality by taking conscious control of the internal attitude with which you are directing your awareness toward what you are aware of as reality, instead of letting that internal attitude be automatically and unconsciously determined for you by your conceptual avatar and its particular conditioning. But here's the sticking point with regard to doing that. You can't take conscious control of the internal attitude with which you are directing your awareness toward what you are aware of as reality, and thereby take direct control of your emotional reality while your individual awareness remains effectively trapped within your conceptual avatar or mind generated concept of self. Because as long as your individual awareness remains effectively trapped within its concept of self, that concept of self will continue to make that primary choice for you automatically, because that's what concepts are supposed to do, i.e., allow for the automation of responses. And so our concept of self is working as intended. It's just being applied continuously and universally to all situations rather than just being applied occasionally and temporarily to the very specific and limited situations of past and future. And our concept of self is being applied continuously and universally to all situations because we have misidentified with it and so have become effectively trapped within it, which then causes us to inadvertently use it to automate and so unconsciously determine what should be our consciously determined primary and fundamental internal response to what we are aware of as reality. Because ultimately, if we are not making that primary choice consciously, then we are effectively asleep at the wheel of our bodily vehicle while our concept of self chooses our internal attitude toward reality according to its conditioning, which is to say, according to how it has been constructed, and so according to which realities it is used to label as good or bad, which then leaves us, the localized awareness, with no choice but to experience the emotional result of whatever internal attitude toward reality it has automatically chosen for us. And so, in the final analysis, our inability to control our emotional reality is just a case of the inadvertent automation of a response that is not supposed to be automated, because that primary and fundamental response, in order to produce the optimal response, needs to be chosen consciously. Because if our primary free will or conscious intention response to reality as allowing or resistant is not being chosen consciously, because it is instead being chosen automatically and unconsciously by our concept of self, then our responses to reality become completely uncoupled from the conscious intention of our non localized self. And that is just not the way that we, as localized awarenesses, are supposed to operate. Instead, the way that we are supposed to operate is by aligning our localized conscious intention with the conscious intention of our non localized self, by consciously choosing our internal attitude toward what we are aware of as reality according to how we naturally want to feel emotionally, which is good rather than bad. That's all. It's just that simple. But that simplicity of operation gets lost and forgotten once we misidentify with our mind generated concept of self or ego and so inadvertently automate a choice that we are supposed to be making consciously. What all of that means is that our minds are not the problem. Instead, the problem is how we end up inevitably and unavoidably misusing our minds while completely unaware of the reality that is both actually there and what we really are. Because while completely unaware of the reality that is both actually there and what we really are, we have no choice but to misidentify with the only realities that we remain aware of while our own fundamental reality remains obscured from our awareness. And the only realities that we remain aware of while the fundamental reality remains obscured are these same appearances or apparent realities that are, through mistaken belief in their nature, functioning as the delusions that are obscuring from our awareness our own fundamental and non apparent reality. It's a simple knot that functions as a perfect awareness trap. And the first relation in that knot is the movement of our awareness into the mistaken belief that the mind generated physical and mental appearances are realities that are actually there. Because that mistaken belief is what causes those created appearances to function as delusions that hide from our individual awarenesses the uncreated reality that is both actually there and what we really are. And the second relation that completes that simple knot, once our own uncreated and fundamental reality has been obscured from our awareness, is the movement of our awareness into misidentification with the physical and mental appearances that our individual minds are generating. And that misidentification leaves our individual awarenesses knotted into and so effectively trapped within what seems to be a purely experiential environment that is composed of various physical, mental, and emotional realities. Because once that misidentification occurs, our free will or conscious intention is no longer free, because it is then bound to operate automatically and unconsciously according to whatever set of mind generated appearances we have misidentified with, instead of according to how we ourselves naturally want to consciously use or exercise it. And again, our free will or conscious intention is our innate ability to individually choose the attitude with which we are directing our localized awareness toward what we are aware of as reality. And there are only two attitudes that we can adopt as we direct our localized awareness toward what we are aware of as reality, each of which is the opposite of the other, and so each of which is mutually exclusive of the other. Meaning, if you are operating with one attitude, then you cannot possibly in that same moment operate with the opposite attitude. And those opposite and mutually exclusive internal attitudes are the attitudes of allowing and resistance, or acceptance and opposition, however you want to put it. And as long as our free will or conscious intention attitude toward reality is being chosen automatically, the way we then naturally and unconsciously respond to what we are aware of as reality keeps our individual awarenesses bound into the knot of delusion that is producing that unconscious response, leaving us with no choice but to continue to mistakenly believe that what are only mind generated appearances are realities that are both actually there and what we really are, because our free will or conscious intention response to reality binds us to all of the prior and yet simultaneous movements of our individual awareness that are the basis of that response. Because as individual awarenesses that are flowing through and animating structured forms of ourself, we are a single and unbroken movement of awareness. Prior to a river being downstream, it was upstream, and yet while downstream, it is simultaneously still upstream. And in the same way, prior to our automatic and unconscious downstream response, our individual flow of awareness was upstream, helping to create the delusional reality it is now responding to. And yet, while automatically and unconsciously responding downstream, our individual flow of awareness is simultaneously still upstream, helping to create the delusional reality it is now unconsciously responding to downstream. What that means is that you can't separate your response to reality, which is a movement of your individual awareness, from the movement of your awareness that created the delusional appearance that is the basis of that response. Because ultimately, there is only a single unbroken movement of your individual awareness. And that's why delusions are so hard to get out of once they have been created, because the created delusion naturally gives rise to a delusion based response that perpetuates the prior and yet simultaneous movement of awareness that is creating the delusion and thereby naturally giving rise to the delusion based response. And that's why we have such a hard time setting aside our mistaken beliefs and misidentifications, despite all the suffering those mistaken beliefs and misidentifications cause us to inadvertently create for both ourselves and others. Because those mistaken beliefs and misidentifications have left our individual awarenesses caught up in a mind generated awareness trap where we no longer get to consciously and so freely choose our free will or conscious intention response to what we are aware of as reality, because that choice of response has been inadvertently automated as a result of those mistaken beliefs and misidentifications. And our automatic and unconscious free will or conscious intention responses then lock or knot us into the mistaken beliefs and misidentifications that are the basis of those responses, thereby causing us to continue to inadvertently automate what should be and needs to be a conscious choice and response if our free will is to truly be free rather than be bound to and enslaved by what is only a mind generated concept of self. Organic existence is not an easy ride, inasmuch as organic life involves your individual awareness flowing through and animating a structured form of itself that requires a continuous input of external resources to maintain that structure. But even though organic existence is not an easy ride, it does not have to be such an unenjoyable ride. But we make it so much less enjoyable than it could be by inadvertently depriving ourselves of our innate ability to consciously choose the attitude with which we are directing our awareness toward what we are aware of as reality, owing to our inadvertent automation of that choice as a result of our misidentification with our mind generated concept of self or ego. When you purchase some new bit of technology, there is usually some sort of owner's manual that comes with it that lets you know how to operate it. But as human beings, we don't get that. Instead, we get the opposite, inasmuch as we are born into this world and then have our minds filled with all sorts of scientific and religious bullshit about the nature of reality and ourselves that we then have to sort through to find the kernels of truth amongst all the bullshit. And a few find some truth and a way out of the suffering, but most still spend their lives mired in the bullshit and suffering as a result. And so, what I'm doing in this series of videos is providing you with information regarding the nature of reality in yourself that you can use to sort through all the scientific and religious bullshit, both well intentioned and otherwise. Because there is, at this point in time, with all the scientific and spiritual knowledge that human beings have managed to come up with and accumulate, just no reason why we need to go through our lives in complete unawareness of what we really are and of what is actually going on here, other than the complete unwillingness and inability of individuals and institutions to let go of ancient, long held, and mistaken beliefs regarding the nature of reality that keep hidden from our individual awareness the reality that is both actually there and what we really are, and in so doing, prevent us from analyzing and interpreting the accumulated scientific and spiritual knowledge in a way that reveals rather than conceals our true nature, because those ancient and mistaken beliefs effectively force us to analyze and interpret that accumulated knowledge in a way that cannot do other than continue to produce a delusional conceptual result that conceals from our awareness our true nature. It is important to understand that the effective entrapment of our individual awarenesses within an experiential environment is not a situation that is being imposed upon us by some outside agency or force, but is instead a situation that we ourselves are creating and perpetuating as a function of just two related things. One, what we mistakenly choose to believe about what we are aware of as reality, and two, how we then naturally respond to reality based upon those mistaken beliefs. And how we analyze and interpret what we are aware of as reality is itself a response that has as its basis what we choose to believe about the nature of the reality we are analyzing and interpreting. That's why scientists have not allowed themselves to analyze and interpret what they have become aware of as quantum level physical reality in a way that challenges their mistaken belief in the objective nature of physical reality, but have instead bent over backwards to come up with what are ultimately inexplicable and so nonsensical interpretations that conform to that mistaken belief, because the belief dictates the response and the response locks in the belief. And at the present time, most human beings, and so most scientists, mistakenly believe that physical reality is an objective reality, meaning they mistakenly believe that physical reality is in some way, shape, or form the reality that is actually there. And so the way they naturally respond to any new physical appearance is by interpreting that new appearance in a way that conforms to their mistaken belief in the objective nature of physical reality, so that that mistaken belief is never really challenged or brought into question, which then allows that mistaken belief to continue to convert physical reality into a delusion that continues to obscure from their individual awarenesses their true reality and nature, leaving them with no choice but to continue to misidentify with their conceptual avatars or egos, which then causes them to inadvertently automate their primary free will or conscious intention response to reality, and which automated response then knots their awareness into the movement by which they become aware of both physical reality and themselves in a delusional way. There is simply no way to become aware of the reality that is actually there while operating from within a conceptual context that mistakenly grants that status to a reality that is only an appearance. It is just as simple as that. It doesn't matter if the reality in question is formless awareness or a mirror. If you mistakenly conceive of either a mind generated appearance or a reflection as being the reality that's actually there, the reality that is actually there vanishes from your awareness. End of story. That's just how the reality that we really are operates, and there's no getting around it. And so, if you want to live a different story, one that does not involve living your life in complete unawareness of what you really are and suffering as a result, you need to start telling yourself a different story about the nature of the mind generated physical and mental appearances than the one you have been most likely, up until now, telling yourself. Specifically, you need to stop telling yourself the false story about the nature of those appearances that causes those necessary and useful appearances to function as reality obscuring and self obscuring delusions, so that you can instead begin to tell yourself the truth about the nature of those appearances, and which truth is that they are just created appearances and not realities that are actually there where they appear to be. Because as long as you continue to mistakenly grant the status of real reality to unreal realities, i.e., realities that are only appearances, you will continue to convert those appearances into delusions that, as delusions, will continue to obscure from your awareness the reality that is both actually there and what you really are, leaving you with no choice but to continue to misidentify with some of those appearances, because those unreal realities are the only realities you remain aware of once you inadvertently convert them into delusions that obscure from your awareness your own reality. And as long as you continue to misidentify with realities that are only appearances, you will continue to inadvertently and unknowingly cede your true power to those appearances. And by true power, I mean your power to consciously choose in each moment the internal attitude of either allowing or resistance with which you are directing your individual flow of awareness toward what you are aware of as reality. As an individual awareness that is flowing through and animating a mind and body, you are the fundamental and real reality. And as the fundamental and real reality, you are an experiential reality creator. And what you create and experience as reality is determined primarily by your internal free will or conscious intention attitude of allowing or resistance. And in general, an internal attitude of allowing tends to produce experiential realities that we want, whereas an internal attitude of resistance tends to produce experiential realities that we don't want, because an internal attitude of allowing aligns our individual flow with the flow of our non localized individuality, which is aware of what we really want and the most enjoyable way to get there, whereas an internal attitude of resistance places our individual flow in opposition to the flow of our non localized individuality, and so leaves us going in the opposite direction. And here I need to be clear that when I say what we want and what we don't want, I am not referring to what our mind generated sense of self or ego wants and doesn't want, but am instead referring to what the formless reality that we really are wants and doesn't want. Our non localized self does not give a fuck what our ego wants or doesn't want, because it's just a created appearance. Rather, its only concern is what the reality that we really are wants and doesn't want. Put another way, although we may be confused with regard to what we really are, and so with regard to what it is that we really want and don't want, our non localized self is not. Our present situation is like being king or queen and then getting conked on the head, and then afterwards believing that a portrait of ourselves hanging on the wall is in charge and so gets to call the shots, thereby causing us, the actual king or queen, to become the unwitting servant of a created appearance that we ourselves commissioned. Such a mode of operation would be completely insane, and such a completely insane mode of operation is what, at the present time, is considered normal, at least at the human level, inasmuch as that insane mode of operation is how almost all human beings presently operate as a result of their misidentification with what is only a mind generated conceptual appearance. No situation or circumstance can determine your emotional reality for you unless you yourself give it the power to do so by inadvertently allowing your free will or conscious intention attitude toward reality to be automatically determined by your conceptual avatar. Put another way, you don't have to feel bad when bad stuff happens or when things don't go the way you want them to go, unless you mistakenly believe yourself to be what is only a mind generated concept of self. In which case, then you do have to feel bad when bad stuff happens and when things don't go the way you want them to go, because you no longer have a choice in the matter because you have inadvertently turned that choice over to your conceptual avatar, which is automatically and always going to use your free will or conscious intention to internally resist any reality that in any way seems to threaten or diminish itself. And this is not a theoretical thing or a matter of opinion. As I said before, I still live both ways and so continue to become aware of emotional realities that are created by both modes of operation. Although I will say I do spend much less time in the unconscious and insane mode of operation than I used to. However, there are appearances that I am still attached to and that I still misidentify with that, on occasion, pull me back into an unconscious mode of operation. But at least now, the deeply negative emotions that are inevitably produced as a result of operating that way, instead of just torturing me, wake me up to the fact that I am, once again, operating from within a concept of self that has become a delusion of self owing to my misidentification with it. And the moment I become aware that I am operating from within a delusional concept of self is the moment I step outside that delusional concept. Because the only way to become aware of the fact that you are operating from within a delusional concept is to have some awareness that exists outside that concept. Now, here I'm going to go off on a bit of a tangent because understanding why you have the innate ability to expand your individual awareness beyond whatever delusional concept your individual awareness has inadvertently and effectively trapped itself within is an important thing to understand. The fundamental, timeless, deathless, and infinite reality that you really are, which is to say, the awareness that you really are, is everywhere. But you are that everywhere reality operating as an individual pole of awareness, and so operating from and becoming aware of reality from a particular somewhere, and so from a particular perspective within your infinite everywhere reality. As I said earlier, the reality that is both actually there and what we really are is simultaneously one and individual, and so is simultaneously everywhere and somewhere. And as that reality flows through and animates these minds and bodies, it becomes locked into or bound to a particular somewhere, at least while the mind is awake. That is, as the fundamental reality flows through and animates a mind, it has no choice but to become aware of the physical, mental, and emotional appearances that that individual and animating flow is helping to produce. But the awareness of those appearances does not, by itself, effectively confine the animating flow of awareness within a seeming or apparent reality that is composed of those created appearances. And that's because, as the fundamental everywhere reality that is also simultaneously operating as an individual reality, you have the ability to expand or contract the somewhere from within which you are operating as an individual pole of awareness. What that means is that you have the innate ability to become aware of reality from an individual point or perspective within the everywhere reality that is relatively larger or smaller. And you have that innate ability because you are the fundamental reality that is simultaneously everywhere and somewhere. And there is absolutely nothing that divides or separates the somewhere from the everywhere because it is the same reality. Put another way, there is no actually existent or ultimately real boundary or border that separates or divides an individual reality that is being aware from a particular somewhere from the everywhere reality that it also and simultaneously is. However, for the fundamental reality to be aware, it needs to operate from a point or perspective that lies somewhere within its infinite self. Put another way, to be aware of any reality, including itself, the fundamental reality needs to operate as an indivisible awareness duality, which then gives it an individual perspective upon itself from each individual pole of that indivisible awareness duality. Put another way, self awareness requires self relation, and self relation is individualization. And individualization is the fundamental reality operating as an indivisible awareness duality, which is to say, as two individual poles of awareness that are moving in relation to each other. That's why all of this is happening, because underlying what we see as physically happening is the infinite and indivisible reality moving in relation to itself, and so becoming involved in iterative and so progressive relations with itself as it becomes aware of itself from an infinity of individual perspectives within itself. And this entire universe is one of those individual perspectives. And within the individual and expanding point of awareness that this universe actually is, there emerges at different levels of scale or different levels of iteration an infinity of additional individual points of awareness. And you are one of those additional individual points of awareness. But that is not all that you are, because there is nothing that actually separates or divides your individuality from any other individuality or from the everywhere reality that you also actually and simultaneously are. Individuality is not an illusion. Individuality is not just an appearance. However, the appearance that you, as an individual, are somehow separable or divisible from all the rest of reality is an illusion. And if you believe in that illusion as some sort of truth, then you have created and entered into a delusion. As I said before, we are all one, but we are also all individuals, and the oneness is not more real than the individuality, and the individuality is not more real than the oneness, because the fundamental reality that is both actually there and what we really are is both simultaneously. What that means is that individual poles of awareness do not have absolutely real or rigid boundaries that separate one individual pole of an indivisible awareness duality from the other individual pole of that same indivisible awareness duality, because again, they are the same indivisible reality. And because that is the case, you, as a localized individuality, have the ability to expand your individual awareness out into your non localized awareness and become aware of reality from that relatively larger or expanded localized perspective, while still flowing through and animating a mind and body, provided that your localized pole of awareness is not doing something that keeps it from doing so. And what I am in the process of doing now is explaining what it is that we do that keeps us from expanding our localized awareness out into our non localized awareness. And what we do and what we are doing that keeps us from being able to expand our localized pole of awareness out into our non localized pole of awareness is inadvertently and effectively confining ourselves to a relatively rigid and defined area of awareness by converting mind generated appearances into what seem to be absolutely real boundaries and so delusions that then seem to truly separate and divide what is here from what is there. And we perform that conversion from appearance into delusion by adopting mistaken beliefs regarding the physical and mental appearances that we are using our minds to produce. Specifically, we convert those appearances into delusions by first creating and then believing in false concepts that tell us that those appearances are something more than just appearances. Because what those false concepts tell us is that those appearances are realities that are actually there. Physical reality by itself is not a delusion, nor is mental reality by itself a delusion. But a physical reality that is being viewed through a false concept is a delusion, and that delusion has two components, the physical appearance and the false mental appearance. Likewise, a mental reality that is being viewed through a false concept is also a delusion, and that delusion also has two components, the mental appearance and the false mental appearance. And so, we become mistakenly and so delusionally aware of physical and mental realities as being realities that are both actually there and what we really are as a result of viewing those appearances through false concepts, which are also just appearances, that essentially lie to us by telling us that those physical and mental appearances or apparent realities are realities that are both actually there and what we really are. However, while aware of any delusion, we are not aware of the two components that make up that delusion, i.e., the physical or mental appearance and the false concept, but are only aware of the delusion as a whole. And so, while operating from within any delusional reality, and so aware of reality in a delusional way, we are not aware that what we are aware of as reality is a composite or compound reality that is composed of two overlapping appearances. Instead, we are aware of the delusion as a single reality, And that awareness of the delusion as a single reality leaves us unable to separate the two appearances that make up the delusion, i.e., the physical or mental appearance and the false mental appearance or concept that is being superimposed upon the physical or mental appearance and thereby converting it into a delusion. And our inability to separate the two appearances that make up a delusion while operating from within that delusion leaves us unable to change the false belief that is converting what is only an appearance into a delusion, because from within the delusion the false belief appears as an unassailable and unalterable fact that is inseparable from whatever now delusional appearance it is being superimposed upon. And when the false belief is the concept that the physical and mental appearances are realities that are actually there, then that false concept or false belief converts what are only mind generated appearances into delusions that continuously obscure from our awareness the reality that is actually there, and so continuously obscures from our awareness our own reality. And that self obscuring effectively confines our localized awareness to an area of awareness that is bounded by those appearances, because we are not going to try to expand our awareness out into an area of our indivisible self that we are completely unaware of as a result of our having obscured that reality from our awareness through false belief in what are only appearances as being realities that are actually there. You are not going to try to walk through a door that appears as a wall, and you are not going to try to expand your awareness into an area of yourself that you are completely unaware of. And that self imposed limitation is how a reality that is both somewhere and everywhere effectively confines itself to a particular somewhere. Not because that reality is still not actually everywhere, but only because that everywhere reality has, through mistaken belief and the delusions that those mistaken beliefs produce, limited itself to being aware of reality from a particular perspective within itself that is bounded by and so limited by those delusions. And then we take the delusion of physical and mental objectivity one step further by next creating and then believing in false concepts that tell us that certain physical and mental realities are not only realities that are actually there, but are also realities that we actually are. And then we are totally fucked, because then we not only obscure our own reality from our localized awareness, but we also inadvertently automate our primary free will or conscious intention choice regarding the attitude of acceptance or resistance with which we direct our individual awareness toward and so fundamentally respond to whatever it is that we are aware of as reality. And that inadvertently automated response causes our individual awarenesses to continue to create and operate within the delusional realities that are producing those automated responses. And on it goes, which is why delusions of self operate as perfect awareness traps. But we will get back to that, because in this tangent, I am explaining what it is that keeps us from expanding our awareness beyond the mind generated appearances, thereby leaving us unable to become aware of our delusional situation from outside the situation, which then leaves us trapped within the delusional situation, unable to change the false belief that we ourselves are using to create the delusion and thereby place ourselves in that situation. And as already stated, what keeps us from expanding our awareness beyond the now delusional mind generated appearances is our complete unawareness that the reality that we really are is there as well, beyond and behind those appearances. On the other hand, once you are able to become aware of a delusional situation from outside that situation, you are then able to see the false belief that is being used to create the delusion as just a belief rather than as an unassailable and unalterable fact, so that you can then at least begin to question it. That's why the only way to become conscious that you are operating from within a delusion is to have some awareness that exists outside the delusion, so you can become aware of the falseness of the belief that is being used to create the delusion. But the delusion keeps you effectively trapped within the delusion and so unable to become aware of the falseness of the belief that is being used to create it, not because you can't expand your awareness beyond it, but only because you never try, because there does not seem to be any awareness there beyond it to expand into. And again, that's why delusions are perfect awareness traps once they have been created and entered into, because they prevent one from simply choosing to become aware from an expanded perspective that makes it possible to question the false belief that is being used to create the delusion. And now I'm going to return to what I was talking about before I went off on that tangent. And what I was talking about was my own personal experience of transitioning between being trapped in a delusion of self and being free to some degree from that delusion of self as a result of being able to expand my awareness beyond that delusion. And as I was saying, the moment I become aware that I am operating from within a delusional concept of self is the moment I step outside that delusional concept. Because the only way to become aware of the fact that you are operating from within a delusional concept is to have some awareness that exists outside that concept, where the false belief that is being used to create the delusion can be separated from whatever appearance it is being used to distort, so it can then be seen as just a belief rather than as an unassailable and unalterable fact. And the moment I step outside my concept of self, I am free to choose my free will or conscious intention response to what I am aware of as reality, based not upon what I am aware of as happening, but based upon how I want to feel, which is to say, based upon the emotional reality that I want to create and become aware of. And at that point, I then consciously choose to internally accept whatever it is that, a moment ago, while effectively trapped within a delusion of self, I was reflexively and unconsciously internally resisting. And then the negative emotion fades away, and I then deal with reality in a much more functional way than I was dealing with it before, because I then have access to the responses that are being recommended by my non localized self, and which responses I did not have access to while automatically and unconsciously flowing my awareness in opposition to my non localized self as a result of my identification with my mind generated concept of self. And in order to make it easier for you to gain access to the responses that are being recommended by your non localized self, even when shit seems to be going sideways, what I am doing is explaining how conceptual reality is supposed to function and also how it is presently dysfunctioning in the human mind to effectively entrap and enslave the individual flows of awareness that are animating and illuminating human minds. Because to understand what has gone wrong with conceptual reality, you first need to understand how conceptual reality is supposed to function. And again, how conceptual reality is supposed to function is as a sort of response template or response filter that is used in conjunction with physically perceived reality in order to automate our responses to external reality. And that is how we are using our conceptual realities. However, what has happened and what has created a problem is that we have lost the ability to set aside and step out of some of those conceptual realities when they are not needed. And as a result, we have become effectively entrapped within them and effectively enslaved by them, seeing reality only as it appears through those conceptual filters and responding to reality only in whatever way those conceptual filters dictate. And in order to understand why we have lost the ability to set aside and step out of certain conceptual realities when they are not needed, we need to understand how we choose which conceptual realities we are going to use as our response templates or response filters. That is, just because we come up with or absorb some conceptual reality does not obligate us to use it as a response template or response filter. Instead, we ourselves get to choose, either consciously or unconsciously, the conceptual realities that we end up using as our response templates or response filters. And we make that either conscious or unconscious choice by believing in certain conceptual realities and by not believing in others. And here we are finally getting to the crux and nub of our whole mind entrap situation, because the conceptual context has now been established that should make it possible for you to understand what it means to believe in a concept, which will then make it possible for you to understand why believing in false concepts leaves your individual flow of awareness effectively trapped within those false concepts or erroneously constructed mind generated appearances. And so first I'll explain what it means to believe in a concept, and then I'll explain how believing in a false concept naturally leads to your individual and animating flow of awareness becoming effectively trapped within a mind-generated appearance or unreal reality that you are yourself, in concert with your mind, helping to create. Believing in a concept means that your individual flow of awareness has formed a very particular relation with that conceptual reality. And again, a conceptual reality is just an internally generated mental appearance that has been constructed by playing connect the dots with various mental realities, so that what you end up with is a composite mental appearance composed of those various mental realities that is structured according to the particular way its constituent mental realities have been connected to each other to form that particular concept. And the relation that exists between your awareness and any concept that you have chosen to believe in is as follows. Belief in a concept means that your individual and animating flow of awareness is willing to operate from within that particular conceptual structure should the need arise. And you are willing to operate from within it because you believe that it is an accurate representation of reality and so expresses some truth about reality. Conversely, if you don't believe that a concept is an accurate representation of reality and so is not true, you don't believe in it and so are not willing to operate from within it. And the word believe is another word that, in its own structuring, points toward what it really means. That is, belief in a concept means that you are willing to be and live in it, i.e., live in it. Now, exactly how we decide which concepts are true and which are not true, I cannot say at this point, although it does seem that some individuals require evidence and others only require that they want a particular concept to be true. But what I can say is this: just because we decide a concept is true does not make it true, and just because we decide a concept is false does not make it false. Clearly, we are fully capable of mistakenly determining that false concepts are true and that true concepts are false. However, the important thing here is not how we determine whether or not a particular concept is true or false. Instead, the important thing here is understanding the relation in which our individual awarenesses are able to become involved with concepts that we, for whatever reason, have decided accurately represent some aspect of reality and so express some truth about reality. And again, the relation in which our individual awarenesses are able to become involved with any concept that we have decided is true, and so believe is true, is that we are willing to operate from within that particular conceptual structure, should the need arise. And here the phrase, should the need arise, is very important because concepts are supposed to be situational. That is, we don't continuously operate from within the concept that is expressed by the words, fire is hot. Instead, we generate and enter into that concept and use it as a response template or response filter only when it is needed, based on previously established connections we have made between the mental realities that correspond to the physical realities of fire and hotness. And in the same way, our conceptual avatar or mind generated concept of self is supposed to be a concept that we generate and enter into occasionally and temporarily when the need arises to think about the past or plan for the future. But what happens once we misidentify with our conceptual avatar is that that concept seems necessary in all situations and so at all times, so that we never stop generating and operating from within it, causing it to function as a conceptual filter that is used to continuously analyze, interpret, and respond to all the rest of reality. For example, if you were always surrounded by fire, then you would need to operate continuously from within the concept that is expressed by the words, fire is hot, in order to respond to that ongoing situation. And in the same way, once we misidentify with our conceptual avatars, we create a situation where it then seems to us that we are always surrounded by and encountering things that have the ability to either enhance or diminish our conceptual avatar. And that then creates what seems to be the need to continuously generate and operate from within that conceptual body or conceptual avatar in order to analyze, interpret, and respond to that self created and ongoing situation. You see, concepts are supposed to be used to allow us to automatically and so more functionally respond to external and internal situations that can positively or negatively affect our actual bodies, meaning the fourth level structures that are actually there where our physical bodies appear to be. And we generate and enter into different concepts as needed, depending on the particular situation, in an attempt to respond to reality in a way that either enhances our body or prevents its diminishment. And if there is no situation or circumstance that requires a response, then there is no need for us to generate and enter into a conceptual reality. However, once we misidentify with our conceptual avatar or conceptual body, we create a situation where, rather than using that conceptual reality to respond to situations that can positively or negatively affect our actual bodies, we instead use that conceptual reality to respond to situations that seem to affect our conceptual body. And because almost every situation seems to have the potential to positively or negatively affect the conceptual reality or conceptual body that we refer to as I or me, there always seems to be a need for us to generate and enter into that conceptual reality so that we can use it as a response template to support and sustain not our actual body, but our conceptual body. And what that means is that once we misidentify with our conceptual self, our concept of self is no longer primarily dedicated to supporting our actual body, but instead becomes primarily dedicated to supporting itself. And supporting itself includes maintaining itself as a conceptual reality, regardless of the effect that doing so has upon the actual body. And because our concept of self is a mind generated appearance that, as a concept, is the product of thought, maintaining it requires us to use our minds continuously in order to continuously think it into existence. And that's why most human beings can't stop thinking. Not because thinking is always needed, but because continuous thinking is needed in order to continuously bring our concept of self into existence. And so continuous thought is the response that our concept of self automatically generates, not to sustain the body, but to sustain itself. Because sustaining that concept of self seems to be of primary importance once we misidentify with it by believing in the truth of the concept, I am this or I am that. Because then its non existence seems to be our non existence. And that's why, even while sitting in a quiet room with nothing going on and absolutely nothing that needs to be responded to in any way with regard to our actual body, our minds are still running a mile a minute, remembering some past situation or projecting ourselves into some future situation, because those mental activities are necessary in order for our ego or conceptual avatar to continue to exist as a conceptual reality. And we won't let it not exist even for a moment because we mistakenly believe that it is what we are. And so, even though the reality that we really are cannot cease to be because it is uncreated and so just is, because at the very least there has to be nothing, we nonetheless, by misidentifying with our conceptual avatars, come to mistakenly believe that we are a reality that can cease to be. And we respond to that delusion by continuously thinking our conceptual avatars into existence. Because without that continuous mental activity, the conceptual reality that we mistakenly believe ourselves to be would cease to exist until it was actually needed, at which point then we could just think it back into existence, which is how it is supposed to be used. And while misidentified with our conceptual avatar, its non existence goes against our nature because it is not in our nature to not be. And so we do what we can to avoid its non existence, even though in actuality, i.e., beyond our delusion of self, there is nothing to avoid because the reality that we really are can't possibly not be. And so to summarize, once we misidentify with our conceptual avatar by mistakenly conceiving it to be what we are, we feel compelled to continuously think it into existence, and every situation seems to require that we operate from within that concept of self because every situation has the potential to either enhance or diminish that concept of self. And as a result, our individual awarenesses never step out of our concepts of self, but instead become effectively trapped within them, and so end up inadvertently and unconsciously using them to determine our primary free will or conscious intention response to reality as allowing or resistant, based not upon the emotional reality that we naturally want to create through that response, but based instead upon whether the reality we are responding to enhances or diminishes our concept of self. And that unconscious and automatic free will or conscious intention response then locks or knots our individual awareness into all the other prior and yet simultaneous movements of our individual awareness that led to and remain the basis of that automatic and unconscious response. And those prior and yet simultaneous movements are the ones by which we came to mistakenly conceive and believe that mind generated appearances are realities that are actually there and that our conceptual self or avatar is what we actually are. You see, whatever experiential realities our minds create, they can only do so using the conscious energy or movement of our individual awarenesses. And our minds use that conscious energy or movement of awareness to generate an ego or conceptual avatar that then, through misidentification, functions to sustain itself. But an ego can only sustain itself using our conscious energy or movement because it has none of its own, because it's just a mental appearance that our minds are able to create as a result of our conscious energy or movement. And so the mental appearance that we refer to as our ego may function as a self perpetuating mechanism once we misidentify with it, but that mechanism is fueled entirely by the movement of our individual awareness. And our egos function as self perpetuating mechanisms by effectively trapping our individual awarenesses within the delusional realities that our individual awarenesses are themselves creating and responding to. Because our delusion based responses lock or knot us into those delusions. Because our delusion based responses are not movements of our individual awareness that are separate from the movement by which we created the delusions, but are instead a continuation of that movement and so perpetuate the movement that creates whatever delusion we are responding to, with the end result being the effective entrapment of our individual awarenesses within delusional realities that we are ourselves through the unbroken movement of our own individual awarenesses, each creating and then responding to. And in that way, by inadvertently automating our primary free will or conscious intention response to reality, we inadvertently and effectively confine our individual flows of awareness within conceptual realities or belief structures that continuously obscure from our awareness our own reality and nature, which then leaves our individual flow of awareness effectively trapped within a reality of created appearances that, relative to the uncreated reality that we really are, is no more real than a dream. It's an amazing situation. It's like building a room of appearances around yourself and then forgetting that they're just appearances that aren't actually there where they appear to be. And then, whenever you try to leave that room, you don't end up actually exiting the room, but instead just end up building either another room of appearances inside that room or another room of appearances that extends off that room, so that you just end up effectively trapped in a different set of appearances. Because the central and primary error is your mistaken belief in the room as being a reality that's actually there, and you take that mistaken belief with you wherever you go. And you take that mistaken belief with you wherever you go because any attempt to leave the room is a response that has as its basis your mistaken belief in the room as being a reality that's actually there. And so that response perpetuates the mistaken belief that is its basis. And that's why escape from the room of physical and mental appearances that we are using our minds to create doesn't come from trying to leave that room or tear it down, but instead comes from simply becoming aware of the ultimate unreality of the physical and mental appearances that make up that room so that you can become directly aware of the ever present and all pervasive reality that is both actually there and what you really are, where physical and mental reality only appear to be. Because whatever reality you respond to is not just the reality you are presently aware of, but is also the reality you remain aware of as a result of that response. Because the movement of your individual awareness by which you become aware of any reality and the movement of your individual awareness by which you respond to what you are aware of as reality are not two separate movements, but is a single unbroken movement. And while directly aware of the formless reality that is both actually there and what you really are, you are still able to respond to the appearances being generated by your mind. But such responses are completely different in nature and much more functional than responses that are delusion based, because such responses will be those that are being recommended by your non localized individuality and not just your ego. The Buddha referred to that sort of action as right action. Right action is not acting or responding according to some set of mind generated rules, but is acting or responding in conscious alignment with the reality that is actually there, where mind generated reality only appears to be. And right action, while being more functional, also has the additional benefit of not leaving your individual flow of awareness effectively trapped in a delusional reality where you will inevitably create and experience suffering. And acting or responding in conscious alignment with the reality that is actually there is what Lao Tzu referred to as actions that align with the Tao, inasmuch as the Tao is the term he used to point toward the singular reality that is actually there, functioning as what we perceive and conceive as the physical universe. You can't change what you really are, and you can't change where you really are, which is always now. What you can change is what the formless awareness that you unchangingly are now believes with regard to what it is aware of as reality. It is mistaken belief that has your individual awareness trapped in an experiential delusion, and it is accurate belief that can free your individual awareness from that experiential delusion. Beliefs are conceptual in nature, and concepts, in addition to being response templates, also function as filters that determine what we are able to become aware of as reality, for as long as we believe in them and so operate from within them. That is why, if you mistakenly believe that what is only an appearance is the reality that is actually there, then the reality that is actually there becomes hidden and obscured from your awareness. Not because it's not there, but only because that reality is not able to enter your awareness because it is being contradicted by, and so is being obscured and filtered out by, the false concept that you are operating from within. And it works the same with regard to anything that we can be aware of as reality. That is, belief in any false concept obscures and so filters out from our awareness any reality that contradicts or opposes that false concept. Therefore, false or mistaken concepts, i.e., those that do not correspond to any actual situation, circumstance, or reality, obscure and so filter out from our awareness any truth that contradicts whatever false concept we believe in and so are operating from within. And if for some reason the truth cannot be entirely filtered out through obscuring, it is instead twisted and distorted in some way by the false concept, so that it then seems to no longer oppose or contradict that false concept, with the end result still being the filtering out of the truth, just in a different way, which is not through its obscuring, but by its conversion into a lie. For example, I live in a country that is presently being run by someone who is clearly one of the most horrible and despicable human beings to ever walk the planet. And I say that as someone who knows with absolute certainty that we are the same reality flowing through and animating two different structured forms of the fundamental reality that we both really are. And the country is now being run by this horrible person because a large segment of the population just cannot see the horribleness that he so clearly and consistently displays. And they cannot see that horribleness because they believe in and so are operating from within so many false concepts concerning this individual, most of which they have not generated themselves, but have instead picked up from the pervasive propaganda and disinformation machine that presently operates in this country. And those false concepts filter out much of his horribleness because they contradict that horribleness and so obscure it from the awareness of individuals who believe in and so are operating from within those false concepts. And whatever horribleness those false concepts can't completely filter out is twisted and distorted by other false concepts so that the horribleness can be made to appear good instead. For example, clear stupidity twisted and distorted into an act of genius, as in, he's playing three-dimensional chess. And to people that are not operating from within the false conceptual reality, the intentional distortion of reality, i.e., the lies used to maintain that false conceptual reality, are both obvious and repulsive. But to people who are operating from within the false conceptual reality, those same lies are like manna from heaven, and they eat them up willingly and eagerly, because then they don't have to themselves perform the mental gymnastics of making a sow's ear appear to be a silk purse, because it's already been done for them by a professional liar. That's why his followers so willingly and eagerly eat up the bullshit, gaslighting, and lies that is referred to as spin. Spin is just the distortion of facts to fit whatever false conceptual reality one is trying to maintain. Facts generally speak for themselves. Spin is the twisting and distorting of facts into bullshit so that they then conform to that false conceptual reality, with the end result being the obscuring and filtering out of the truth. The bottom line is this: concepts are powerful things, both in terms of their reality filtering and reality response capabilities. Therefore, belief in a concept should not be entered into lightly, but should be chosen carefully, based upon demonstrable evidence, and not just because you want it to be true, or just because some gaslighting moron with a TV show or podcast says it is. And that concepts are such powerful things, both in terms of their reality filtering and reality response capabilities, is why it is the case that as long as you continue to mistakenly believe that a reflection that lies within a mirror is what is actually there, the mirror that is actually there remains hidden from your awareness. Because the mistaken concept regarding the nature of the reflection that you are viewing the mirror through contradicts the reality of the mirror, and so filters out the reality of the mirror, and so obscures it from your awareness, even though you are looking right at it. Put another way, the mirror is what is actually there, and the reflection only appears to be what is actually there. But if you are looking at the mirror through a concept that is telling you that the reflection is what is actually there, then that false concept filters out and so obscures from your awareness the mirror that is actually there, leaving you unaware of it even while looking right at it. And as long as that is the case, any response your awareness generates occurs not according to what is actually there, but according to what only appears to be there. On the other hand, change your inaccurate belief regarding the nature of the reflection to an accurate belief, and poof, the mirror enters your awareness because its reality is no longer being contradicted by a false concept, and so is no longer being filtered out and obscured. And then your response changes entirely and now occurs according to an accurate awareness of what is actually there and what appears to be there, instead of according to an inaccurate awareness of what only appears to be there. And that obscuring conceptual mechanism works the exact same way with regard to the formless awareness that we really are, and the mind generated physical and mental appearances that come to exist within our awareness. That is, as long as you continue to mistakenly believe that an appearance that you are using your mind to create is a reality that is actually there, that false concept contradicts the reality of the formless awareness that is actually there, and so filters out and obscures that fundamental reality from your awareness, leaving you completely unaware of it, even though that fundamental reality is both everywhere and what you really are. And even though, in the hypothetical and yet completely impossible absence of that fundamental reality, there would be no such thing as a reality of any sort, apparent or otherwise. And that unawareness of your own reality then leaves your individual awareness with no choice but to misidentify with the only realities that you remain aware of while the fundamental reality remains obscured. And those realities are the mind generated physical and mental appearances, and also emotional reality. Because even though your own fundamental reality has become obscured from your individual awareness, it is still there and hasn't actually gone anywhere, which is why you remain aware of experiential reality even while completely unaware of your own non experiential reality. Because your reality is still there, your awareness is still there. It's just not aware of itself because its own reality is being continuously filtered out by a false concept regarding the nature of physical and mental reality that you believe in, and so continuously operate within. That, in a nutshell, is the mechanism of Maya, which is to say, the mechanism by which the fundamental reality, i.e., formless awareness, first hides itself from itself behind a veil of mind generated appearances as a result of those appearances being converted into reality obscuring delusions by false concepts regarding their nature, after which awareness then naturally misidentifies with those now delusional mind generated appearances and thereby locks or knots itself into, and so effectively traps itself within, a purely experiential delusion that it knows as what is real and all that is real, and also what it really is. No wonder the Buddha is laughing, because it is a ridiculous situation. But it is the situation we are in. And as long as the non localized awareness that is actually there remains hidden from your individual awareness, meaning as long as your own reality remains hidden from you, any response your individual awareness generates occurs not according to what is actually there, but according to what only appears to be there, and also according to whatever set of appearances you have misidentified with and so mistakenly believe yourself to be. On the other hand, change your inaccurate belief regarding physical and mental reality to an accurate belief by recognizing that physical and mental reality are just appearances and not realities that are actually there. And poof, the reality of awareness enters your awareness because it is no longer being filtered out and obscured by a delusion. And then your responses change entirely because your responses then have as their basis an accurate awareness of what you really are and what appears to be there, instead of an inaccurate awareness of what only appears to be there. As long as we are functioning as individual awarenesses that are flowing through and animating these bodies and minds, and which bodies and minds are really just relationally structured forms of our own formless reality, we are bound to become aware of reality through a veil of mind generated physical and mental appearances. There is no getting around that. But that veil of appearances can be either transparent or non transparent, and you get to decide which it is going to be based upon what you choose to believe regarding the nature of those appearances. And if you choose to believe that the mind generated physical and mental appearances are realities that are actually there, then that mistaken belief or false concept, which is itself just a mind generated appearance, converts those physical and mental appearances into delusions that contradict the reality that is actually there, thereby giving those delusions the ability to filter out and so obscure from your awareness the reality that is actually there, thereby obscuring from your awareness its own fundamental and all pervasive reality. On the other hand, if you instead choose to believe that the mind generated appearances are just appearances and not realities that are actually there, that accurate belief or true concept does not convert those appearances into delusions that contradict the reality that is actually there, so that those appearances then no longer have the ability to filter out and obscure from your awareness the reality that is actually there, so that that reality can then enter your awareness and thereby reveal to you your true nature and reality as a formless presence or formless awareness, which you can then choose to accurately identify with instead of continuing to inaccurately identify with mind generated realities that are no more real than reflections, projections, shadows, and rainbows, because they are all just created appearances and not realities that are actually there where they appear to be. Because the reality that is actually there is the uncreated and formless reality that is either accurately or inaccurately aware of those appearances, and so either aware or unaware of itself. Most spiritual practices try to get you to change the way you act or respond to reality, promising liberation and enlightenment as a reward. But if those different responses don't flow from a different awareness of reality, but are just functioning as a new set of rules and programmed responses within the same delusional awareness of reality, then nothing really changes, and you just end up effectively trapped in what is perhaps a somewhat more pleasant room of appearances. It is simply the case that most, if not all, of these spiritual practices that are recommended that one undertake to reach the state of liberation and enlightenment, i.e., the state of being directly and continuously aware of the formless reality that is both actually there and what one really is, are actions and responses that one naturally takes when one is already directly aware of that reality. Don't react with attachment and aversion. Love thy neighbor as thyself, etc., etc. But the fact is, it just doesn't work that way. That is putting the cart before the horse, and it really doesn't get you anywhere, although it may seem to. Put another way, mimicking the way that a liberated individual responds to reality will not lead to liberation and enlightenment. The truly liberated individual is responding to reality in the way they do as a result of the enlightened way they are being aware of reality. Their awareness of reality changed and right action followed naturally, not the other way around. In other words, mimicking right action from within a delusional reality will just keep you trapped in that delusion because you are still acting on the basis of a delusion, because you are still trying to escape a room that isn't really even there. External action cannot change what you are aware of as reality. Instead, external action can only maintain your awareness of the reality that is producing that action. And that is because external action is always a secondary movement of awareness that follows and flows naturally from the primary movement of awareness by which you become aware of reality. And that secondary movement locks or knots your awareness into the primary movement because they are not two separate movements, but are two aspects of a single unbroken movement of awareness. That's why true, deep, and lasting change only comes with a fundamental change in how you are being aware of reality, which means a fundamental change in what you believe regarding what you are aware of as reality, and that change requires an internal rather than external action. And true right action follows naturally from that and maintains that enlightened awareness for the same reason that mimicking right action from within a delusion maintains the delusion. External action is important, but more important than external action is the awareness of reality that is giving rise to that action. And that's why all of this explaining of reality that I'm doing in all of these videos is being done to provide you with the opportunity to become aware of the fact that physical and mental reality are both just mind-generated appearances and not realities that are actually there. Because that is the fundamental conceptual error or mistaken belief that keeps our individual awarenesses effectively trapped in those appearances turned delusions, completely unaware of the reality that is both actually there and what we really are, as we naturally respond to reality on the basis of those delusions and not on the basis of what both we and reality really are beyond those appearances turned delusions. And so to summarize, our primary free will or conscious intention response to reality as allowing or resistant is not supposed to be something that is automatically determined by a conceptual reality or conceptual response filter. Instead, that response is supposed to be something that we consciously choose in each moment, based upon the emotional reality that each of those choices produces. And that's because making that choice consciously, according to the emotional reality it produces, is the only way to reliably and consistently align our localized conscious intention with the conscious intention of our non localized individuality. And that's what we really want to do. Yes, as individual flows of awareness, we have free will and so are free to direct our individual awareness in alignment with or opposition to the rest of reality. But having free will does not free you from becoming aware of the experiential realities that you create as a function of whatever choice you make in that regard, regardless of whether you are making that choice consciously or unconsciously. For example, you are free to choose to jump off a cliff, but you are not free to choose what happens as a result of having made that choice, regardless of whether you are making that choice consciously, aware of what will happen, or are making that choice unconsciously on the basis of some delusion that you harbor regarding your ability to fly. And in the same way, you are free to direct your individual awareness in opposition to your non localized self. But you are not free to choose what you experience as reality as a result of having made that choice, regardless of whether you are making that choice consciously, in awareness of what you really are, or are making that choice unconsciously on the basis of some delusion that you harbor regarding what you are. Free will is a great thing because free will is what allows the indivisible reality of awareness to enjoy itself by functioning as an infinity of different individualities. But having free will does not free us from the experiential obligations that we incur as a result of how we, as individual points of awareness, are choosing, either consciously or unconsciously, to exercise our free will or conscious intention. Put another way, it doesn't matter whether we exercise our free will consciously or unconsciously. Our individual movement either aligns with or opposes the movement of our non localized individuality, and what we experience as reality flows from that. End of story. Of course, our non localized individuality would rather we make that primary and fundamental choice consciously, because then we would make better choices, which is to say, choices that would not cause us to suffer, but it can't make our choices for us. All our non localized individuality can do is provide us with guidance and information so that we can eventually learn to make that primary and fundamental choice consciously on the basis of what both we and the rest of reality really are, instead of continuing to make that choice unconsciously on the basis of false and mistaken concepts that we harbor regarding both the nature of reality and ourselves. In general, you don't have to teach people not to jab themselves in the arm with a pointed stick. They naturally just don't do that. But if someone were to fall under the delusion that their arm is a snake, then they would naturally tend to do the unnatural. And as human beings, we have fallen under the delusion that all the rest of reality, other than what we perceive and conceive as being right here, is something other than ourself. And as a result, we naturally tend to do the unnatural and internally jab at any reality that seems to pose even the tiniest threat to our delusional sense of self. And all I'm trying to do is provide you with the opportunity to realize that being aware of any reality as being something other than yourself is a delusion, so that you can naturally and without any further effort stop automatically and unconsciously responding to reality in a way that keeps your individual flow of awareness effectively trapped in an experiential delusion, completely unaware of the reality you really are, and so completely unaware of your connection to and indivisibility from all that is, and suffering as a result. And that seems to be it for now, thank God, because this was originally going to be a single video that ended up turning into 4 videos. I can't argue with that. Maybe even enough time for 11 meals. In any case, there are still 2 videos left in this series that I plan to make. And in the next video, I will provide relatively irrefutable evidence that physical reality is just a created appearance and not the reality that is actually there, by using the facts of science and the impactive mechanism of physical reality creation put forth in video 5B to fully explain the appearance of physical reality as a whole, meaning how it appears at both the macroscopic and quantum levels. Because I'm not asking you to believe what I'm saying about the nature of physical reality just because I say so. Instead, I'm asking you to believe that physical reality is just a created appearance and not the reality that is actually there, because, as I will show in the next video, that is what the physical evidence clearly and consistently indicates when that evidence is analyzed and interpreted in an accurate rather than inaccurate conceptual context regarding the nature of physical reality. And so until next time, namaste.